Bill, welcome to Director's Notes.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, you're so welcome. I'm going to let you kick things off and just give us a little bit of an introduction to you and to the film we're going to be discussing today.
Okay, my name is Bill Morrison. I'm a filmmaker. I often work with archival footage, though generally it's the archaic nature from the most ancient nitrate films that nobody seems to care about anymore. I've made a career out of extracting that stuff and compiling them into new titles. This film takes a bit of a different direction for me, though I'm still, I think, saving footage from otherwise obsolescence in that I'm using police surveillance camera and closed circuit TV camera from private stores to reconstruct the 2018 murder of Harith Augustus at the hands of police officers on the south side of Chicago, and only using this source footage to tell a story of this murder and sort of the narrative that the police unfold in the wake of it.
That's a very apt summary of what I would call one of the most complicated films I've seen in a long time.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I am going to do a little bit of cheating here. I was interviewing another filmmaker recently who works with archival image, and he was talking about the film that he's made out of this archival image acting as an intervention to the original footage. And I thought that was actually a really interesting point when discussing your film and all of the different footage that you've got and putting it together.
Mm.
And as you said, sort of creating that narrative. So I don't know what you think about that sort of thought process.
Right. Well, of course, all this footage is from an archive, albeit a contemporary archive, and a vast archive of all the recorded images that are compiled by police and by store monitors every day, every minute. We're sort of flooded in images now. But I think what's forms an intervention here is also the police awareness that they're being recorded and that they're creating an archive as they work. So there's a performative nature to their work and their behavior by virtue of the fact that they're being recorded and that it's incumbent on them to press record and to turn their cameras off, which is a big sort of subplot, in this film is the awareness that the police are being recorded and they're manifesting when the endpoints are becomes sort of material for the imagery itself. So in that way, it is an intervention on the archive in that it's not just taking the footage at their face value, but also who's recording it and who gets to see it.
Yeah. I I've watched the film over and over, and I think the more I watched it, I felt like the police could have been actors
Yeah.
who had been told to play a role and who had been told this is what I want your facial expression to be,
Yeah.
and that terrified me to my core.
No,
What I mean, what was your reaction? And with all the editing and just how did you know what to focus on and who you wanted to follow at what point?
right. Well, clearly, first of all, just to your point about feeling like you were watching actors, there is this uncanny feeling that, first of all, this is somehow being created for cameras. We have this multiracial police force, all of whom are at fault, not just the white murderer and his accomplice partner, but also the Asian cop who's also equally at fault in creating the situation, and the older black cops and commanders who are turning a blind eye to it and enabling this narrative to continue. It's a multiracial, it's not even a black and white problem as much as it is a blue and everything else problem. So that's one thing. There's these eerie, seagulls that float in and out of the frame that seem to portend to Snoop's soul being carried off. Or there's the uncanny vision of his gun license being visible to the camera as if that was staged. It's almost impossible to imagine that the guy's gun license would actually appear in the frame of the police officer's lens, but there it is for all of us to see. And then on the sidewalk later. So there is just extraordinary what is captured. From an editing point of view, of course, I was um, working with what I was given. The only audio that's provided is by the body worn cameras. So that initial POD, police observation device, or God's eye, that establishes the murder, and it's the only camera that captures the entire string of events at 5:30. Um, that was necessarily silent, and then it's informed by the officer saying police shot, or shots fired at police, and then he has to correct himself, though he doesn't actually correct himself, but he acknowledges that that's not entirely true, and then that he makes up this story that a gun was drawn on him and he acted in self-defense. So, taking the silence that we experience at the beginning, where we don't understand what's happened, gradually we learn what's happened as audio is introduced, and then there's this poor officer at the very end who's assigned to sort of write up the case, and he necessarily can't have known or can't have been there. He's supposed to be working from an objective point of view and asking questions, but again, everyone's on camera. They're not going to say the truth while they're on camera, and it's not until the commander instructs all body-worn cameras to be turned off that he presumably can ask what actually happened and how he's supposed to write the case up to reflect the official police narrative. And at which point we are plunged back into the same silence we began, but now afforded the knowledge of what happened and how it's going to be described, and that there's very little we can do about it. So it is a frustrating film in that way.
Yeah. Was there ever a option of putting something over that silence?
Well, no. I mean, when I made this film, any project, any film you begin, you create parameters for how you're going to use the footage. And one of these, I wanted to make it entirely of the publicly available footage, the footage that the police had released. And therefore, the audio that you hear is all happening concurrently with the match the time stamp that you see in the upper left-hand corner. I certainly didn't want to include a narrator or, God forbid, music. I didn't want to have talking heads. I wanted it all to be told with this footage, which in some ways compromises what you might see as the glossy cover of a documentary. But on the other hand, it is really made of the document itself.
Mm. Yeah. And I don't know, there was part of me watching it that I was like, maybe I was expecting sounds just of the street, of normal life, of when people are sort of saying hi, and but the silence,
Well,
it's
you
part of it.
you do get the sound of the community as recorded by those mics as the
You
police are
do.
keeping them at bay, and they sort of form what I call a Greek chorus. This is a community that's witnessed this kind of violence in the past, and and recently the Laquan McDonald murder is on their minds because the trial for that officer is coming up. It's referenced in some of the things they say. There's one man who says, you've already taken one of mine. Now you're just killing random people. Um, you know, and we are hearing the street. This isn't just the officers talking. This is you know, the the input of the community is a big part of what I've included here.
Mm. How did you, in the editing and in putting the frames together and what we're seeing, make sure to avoid a subjectivity on what we're looking at?
Well, just that. I mean, if I had introduced new imagery, of course, that would be something that I had chosen, and would reveal a partiality in only using police footage or footage that they've made available. Uh, there is a inherent objectivity to it. I there's some editing where for instance, when Officer Jones takes the gun out of Snoop's holster and claims it as police evidence so that it no longer is still on his body, and it supports the idea that he'd drawn the gun. Uh, I use an inset at that point to draw your attention to it, but it's not like it wasn't already there or that it's somebody's opinion. I just want to emphasize that that's what we're looking at, and indeed, that's also the last image told from a different view, the silhouette of him taking that gun out of the holster, and that's the last image of the film. The idea is that I'm sure any viewer can tell where I'm coming from, why I think it's an important story to tell. At the same time, I think it would be hard for any supporter of the police to say none of this happened the way I showed it.
Hmm. Has has there been backlash?
Not yet, but give me an Oscar, there might be.
Why do you think?
I think it could become a much more widely seen and widely discussed film. And at that point, yeah, the officers in question might have, uh, until a month ago, it was just seen in film festivals, uh,
Yeah,
or people who subscribe to the New Yorker.
yeah.
There's been as someone who reads the letterboxed reviews of my films, I've seen it jump from 71 to 72 to 74, and then to 300 to 800 to 1200 over the course of the last week. So, um, you know, there's a great recognition that comes with the nomination, and I think with a win, it might become more of a national story or something that's shared more widely or commented on the news, which might provoke a response from Chicago police. I don't know.
Yeah. And how do you react if this has happened, or how do you feel that you were the person to tell this story and you were the one to put it together?
Well, I'm not. I mean, this is all based on the work of the producer and journalist Jamie Kalven. He has had a long career of documenting social activism on the south side of Chicago and more recently police oversight with several different projects, beginning them with Laquan McDonald in 2014. But it was really his journalism and that revealed, that there was a culpable police who eventually was charged with first-degree murder, and that ultimately changed the law that police couldn't just hold on to evidence like this, that they had to upload it or make it available to the public within 60 days, which, gave rise to this situation where police were wearing cameras and knowing well that they were going to be building an archive every day, and that would affect their performance, and we can only imagine they've been coached on how to behave and with these cameras, when to trigger them, when to not. Um, and it's Jamie's work as a journalist that this film is based on. It was, quite literally, he wrote about Laquan McDonald, then he wrote about Harith Augustus. He produced 6 videos with forensic architecture out of London called Six Durations of a Split Second in 2019. And then as more of this footage became available, he wrote sort of a summation of this case and, referencing the new video that became available in 2022. And I read that article and saw it as the makings of a new film.
Mm. And you two, were you collaborative in the sort of the making of this, and you taking his work and putting it on a sort of different level?
Yeah, I would say so. I work entirely alone as an editor, but Jamie was available to fact check and in some cases to oversee how text, to proofread text as I submitted it so that, it reflected his work and the legal code in Chicago, which he's an expert about. And but I'm a filmmaker of some 30 years now, and so producing it and getting it out to the festivals largely fell on my shoulders. And then as we started to get attention and doing more talkbacks and Q&As after screenings, we really operated as a team, discussing the work and discussing the history in tandem with one another. And that's been a great pleasure and really educational experience for me too.
Yeah. I was watching some interviews with you two, and yeah, no, there is a beautiful sort of flow with what you're talking about and your experiences of sort of making it as well. And for you, who's somebody whose filmmaking has concentrated on, much older archival footage, how has this influenced you? How did you find the experience?
Well, I mean, there are some similarities, of course, this idea of saving some footage from obsolescence that no one else would see otherwise. And so there's this kind of use of the archive as documentary, you know, unseen ground. And that's always been something that's exciting to me. It's even when I'm using old images, they're old images that no one has seen before. Even silent film veterans haven't seen these images before. And I'd say that no one has ever seen police footage like this before. This is sort of unprecedented. So in both cases, it's an approach to archival filmmaking of horizon breaking rather than redundancy. And of course, it's extraordinary the social relevance that this story has. Unfortunately, it's an evergreen issue, especially in the United States, police violence against Black men. And, it's coming in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. And
Yeah.
uh, but also now, this occurred during the first Trump administration, and we are now in the second Trump administration, and there's a lot of talk anyway about empowering police to mobilize, deportations and, uh, tough on crime and these kind of code words for systemized violence, and racist violence. So I think it's important time to see the film. Uh, Increasingly, our media outlets are not reporting on this kind of stuff in the way that they used to. And so it's incumbent on independent journalists and indeed artists to seize on these stories and try to bring them to light.
Yeah. How have you found audiences, talking about festivals and people seeing this?
Yeah, I mean, first, I was surprised because it took a long time before this film showed in the United States, right? I premiered it in April 23 in in Nyon at Visions de Real. Um,
Okay.
and so that's a pretty rarefied European festival
Mm.
audience. And I would say the only time it's played in England was at Sheffield a few months after that. It's never played London. uh, and it went around in sort of this rarefied festival air where a certain type of film-going audience who might be familiar with my work saw it. And it wasn't until uh, September that Telluride programmed it, an American audience that started seeing it, September of 23. And then quite surprisingly, it won the IDA award at the end of that year, which sort of became the cachet that I needed to get somebody like the New Yorker to actually answer an email and say, yes, we've watched this. Yes, we're interested in it. And and then, it won a festival, the Florida Film Festival, the following year, which Oscar qualified it, and we've sort of been building support since then. But uh, you know, by and large, it's been in sort of these rooms of 50 people. There's certainly, a hushed gasp, palpable gasp in the audience as they see it. Um, we've had few uh, Chicago screenings, two only. We showed it at the Chicago Humanities Festival in November of 23 in the presence of the mother of the victim, of Snoop's mom, which was really moving. I mean, she stood up afterwards, uh, having been denied a wrongful death suit by the police, was sided with the police. She stood up and said, "Okay, now the world can see what happened to my son." And she looked at me and she said, "It's incumbent on you to tell this story." And so I feel that I need to get the film out here as much as possible. And then the second Chicago screening was just maybe 6 weeks ago at the Gene Siskel Film Center, where we had a 30-minute film was followed by a 90-minute discussion, and number of people of color in the audience, and that was a really different and charged atmosphere than other screenings that I've experienced.
Yeah. What what do you want this film to to do, really? Do you want it to affect police practice? Do you want it to, there's so many big changes that obviously are needed, but that's too much of a bigger question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not looking to hang these individual officers. I think, uh, they're part of a systemic problem. I
Hmm.
think the best use of this film moving forward would be if it was shown in police academies and as sort of instructional, saying, okay, who messed up when? Can we all agree that it's tragic that a 37-year-old, pillar of the community, a barber, is now dead in the street, and that he was licensed to own a gun? And there's all this anger and outrage and distrust of the police has only been exacerbated by this event. At what point could have this been, de-escalated? And I think if you saw the older uh, veteran officer, Quincy Jones, who stops Snoop on the street and asks him about his gun, if things had been just left between the two of them or his partner and Snoop, it would have gone off with a warning or some sort of, maybe there had been a citation. Uh, but I don't think it would have gone further than that. And it was, this excitement of these rookie cops who had been told that they need to strike first, that they're in some sort of dangerous jungle situation, and any black man with a gun is a threat to your life. Um, it was this kind of thinking that created a situation where a split-second decision had to be made. Um, and unfortunately, those split-second decisions are, afforded great deference to the officer without looking at the scope of events that led up to it.
Yeah. Well, look, best of luck. I'm going to do my bit. I've been sharing it round.
Thank you
I've
so much,
sent it
Sarah.
to a lot of people. And I think this is important. And I found it incredibly challenging. And also living in England, we are the most viewed. We've got the most cameras. Everyone can see everything
Right.
here.
Well, I would love
Uh,
to bring it to London. It hasn't played there yet, so maybe some programmer is listening to your show. Let's talk.
yeah. I would absolutely, yeah. I will try and facilitate that for you as well.
Okay, Sarah, it would be great to have you moderate or somehow be involved. That would be fun.
All right, Bill, it's on. The challenge is on.
Okay, very good. So I know it's a little bit later there for you, so I wish you a good night.
Thank you so much. It was lovely talking to you.
Lovely talking to you.